Welcome to the Solid Signal podcast for the week of August 15th, 2022. You know, last week was a pretty controversial podcast and certainly the angriest one that I've recorded in a very long time. And it also got a lot of comments. Not all of them were positive. But hey, that's what engagement is about. It's about discussing things and bringing up the issue of, people having their own opinions, their own ways to prove someone wrong. And I love to be proven wrong, by the way. I love learning stuff and I love challenging my expectations. I hope you do too. But I got a lot of comments, a lot of unhappy comments about that podcast. Some of the podcast comments were, really just kind of amusing, like, man, you really went off on that one, or, have a cup of coffee, or don't have a cup of coffee, or whatever it is that, people wanted to say. But there were a few that kind of all fell into the same category last week. And so this one goes out to the retired engineers out there, for whom I want to say that I have a lot of respect for all of you and for your learning and for everything that you've got to say. And I will say up front, your comments were not wrong. And if I misrepresented what I was saying because I was angry and cranky, I certainly didn't want to do that. So I'm going to proactively, kind of on your behalf, take up that side of the argument from last week to try to clear up exactly what I was trying to say. So a typical comment that I got from a retired engineer or DIY or that sort of thing was, how dare you say that you can't get TV reception from 250 miles? I put up a tower, that's 90 feet tall, and I put 3 of your extreme signal antennas together in a custom built array, and with a custom preamp that I programmed based on one of your, Johansson or Televez high-end amplifiers, and I'm getting better television reception from 200 miles away than you probably get from 20 miles away. And so you are wrong, and I'll still buy from Solid Signal, but I'm going to be listening to what you say with a grain of salt from now on, because I can prove you wrong, and I'm happy to send you some pictures, that sort of thing. That's a kind of a combination of a lot of comments that I got. I didn't want to single out one particular person, but they tended to go along that line. And so I want to say, first of all, to those folks who have really invested heavily in their antenna setups and who are getting really good reception, and I commend you and I thank you for using Solid Signal to buy the stuff that you needed, because, it does kind of pay my salary, and I didn't mean to imply that you shouldn't do that. But I will say that you kind of proved my point. When I was looking at this article, I was looking at an antenna that was about the size of a typical loose leaf notebook intended for indoor use, claiming that it would get 250 mile range. And a lot of you came out and said, that you're using a lot of extremely expensive equipment placed outdoors on very high towers to get really long reception. And so I think, really, if you think about it, we're both saying the same thing, which is that your indoor antennas are simply not going to do that. But it brings up the question of why. Why is it that, for example, even a company like Solid Signal doesn't sell a 200 or 250 mile antenna, knowing that there is technology that you could do it? And that's because the truth is that if you get into that kind of situation where you are trying to get TV reception from 250 miles away, it's generally it's a pretty unique situation. It's your particular area is going to have very specific needs, and so there's not going to be a one size fits all solution. And even if there was, the unfortunate thing is there's the world, you see, works on manufacturing at scale, and we would like to offer things to our customers that are affordable and reasonable and that they can bring into their homes and offices and do really well with. And unfortunately, we've been unable to find a manufacturer who would be able to do those kind of things in the quantities that we'd need them in, which are fairly low. But rest assured, if you do want to put together an antenna that will get that kind of reception, you can do it. You can do it with a custom quote from solidsignal.com, and we're going to give you everything you need, starting at the tower level. A lot of people don't realize that Solid Signal does towers, but we do custom quotes for towers, not just for big broadcast facilities or first responders, but for regular folks who just want to get a little bit better reception. Even with a small tower, you can get better reception because you're just going to go above the trees, which are surprisingly effective at blocking your antenna signal. We can sell you not only large custom antennas that are just, for a particular channel, but also we can sell you the big antennas like our bruiser of an extreme signal 8200 XL, the largest antenna designed for consumer use for broadcast television. And you'll be able to take that and do what you want to do with it and point it the way you wanted it to point it. And as this, kind of composite commenter pointed out, we also offer these really high-end programmable amplifiers from places like Televez and Johansson that can give you the punch that you need to bring in over-the-air signal from far, far away. The unfortunate thing is that this kind of power is really not in the hands of regular people. And I think that was the point that I was trying to make in this heated podcast. If you haven't heard it yet, by the way, if you haven't heard the stuff that I was talking about in last week's podcast, you owe it to yourself, because I admit I kind of let loose quite a bit there and had a lot of fun doing it. Antenna technology is something that appeals to a lot of the hobbyists out there, and the best part of it is nothing is truly impossible if you're willing to really make a go of it. It's just that there are certain little kind of bits that are impossible. If you want to have a TV antenna the size of a ballpoint pen that will get reception from 4 states away, that's probably not going to happen. But if you are willing to put in the time and the effort to do it, to learn everything that you need to learn about antennas and how they work and why they work, you just might surprise yourself. And you'll surprise yourself using the kind of parts and pieces that you'll find at solidsignal.com, using the kind of tutorials you'll find at the Solid Signal blog, blog.solidsignal.com, and at typical podcasts like the ones that I'm doing here. There does come a point where reception is really so impractical that it's hard to say it's possible for a regular person. And I guess that's a much better way of putting it. And it comes down to the idea of signal and noise. Digital signals, such as those used for broadcast television, are really just a string of zeros and ones placed on an analog carrier wave and broadcast out from a central point. And that means that in a lot of senses, it doesn't really matter how weak the signal is as long as it can be detected. You see, a very, very strong signal isn't going to do a lot more for you than a fairly weak one, as long as that weak one can still be received. Which is why you do sometimes need a bigger antenna like the 8200 XL, because a little antenna with a big amplifier on it isn't going to necessarily get those really, really fringe signals. Because if it can't be received at all, then it can't be amplified. And let me clarify a little bit about what I mean by received. You see, the signal itself has to be distinguishable from the noise around it. There's noise inherent in every broadcast frequency, and some of it comes from, just things in the environment. It comes from electrical lines. It comes from all sorts of stuff. And some of it comes, believe it or not, from the remnants of the Big Bang that made our universe. It's all part of the package that is the noise inherent in broadcasting, the ambient noise that determines whether or not you'll be able to receive something. Because once that signal drops down to where a certain amount of it is so weak that noise itself is more strong than the signal, it can't be received. And there's a lot of redundancy built into broadcast TV signals. It's necessary because of the compression used in them, but there does come a point where there just isn't enough there. It's so weak that the noise overtakes it, and that's unfortunate. That's why a bigger antenna will always outperform a smaller antenna in a truly fringe situation like that. It's not to say that amplification isn't useful, and certainly amplification has its place, because most of us don't find ourselves in truly fringe situations. We find ourselves in these sort of semi-fringe situations where you're just, you're far enough from the towers that you can't quite get what you're looking for, but you could if you could just amplify it just a little bit. And that's what TV antenna amplifiers do. But I say again, once you get to the point where the signal itself is so weak that it's below the noise floor, it can't be done. Ways to combat this, as I've said before, are to raise the antenna to the point where it's above trees and other obstructions that could weaken the signal, because anytime a signal is going to go through something like a tree or a building or a hill, it's going to get weaker and therefore harder to keep above the noise floor. So raising that antenna nice and high is going to make it a lot easier. Sometimes the environment will give you a benefit. If you've got very stable air, for example, certain frequencies will be easier to receive than others. If you're in certain environments where you're surrounded, for example, by mountains, you may get a better a chance at reception if you point at the mountains instead of pointing directly at the towers, because there might be less obstructions if you're just looking at a single bounce where the signals hit the mountains and bounce back to you, that sort of thing. And there are super clean amplifiers that do a very good job of not introducing more noise into an already noisy environment. So you can do really well. You can also use very large antennas. Typically, the size of an antenna is historically going to be 1/4 the size of the wave or 1/2 the size of the wave, but you could use a full wavelength antenna, which in the case of low VHF means you'd be using, a 13 or 14 foot wide antenna. You can use more than one of them and combine the signals so that you get even more. You can even use antennas that are double or quadruple or 8 times the size of the signal that you're trying to receive. You can use parabolic antennas, which look like satellite dishes, because satellite dishes are parabolic antennas that collect as much signal as they possibly can from a large area and then focus it on a single point so it can be received even better. There's options. But all of these, I point out again, are generally beyond what the average person is either capable or willing to do. And, I'm just grateful for those folks who are willing to go the extra mile to make that happen. Anyway, that's about it for the Solid Signal podcast. I just looked at the timer, realized I've been talking for about 13 and a half minutes. The time goes by when you're having fun, my friends. So keep those comments coming, keep that engagement coming, and I will be looking forward to talking to you next time on the Solid Signal podcast. If you still think that I haven't quite got it right, leave another comment and I'll clarify. It makes it easier for me to find content for next week. Like and subscribe always makes me look good to my bosses, and I will see you again next week on the Solid Signal podcast.